Hello, I'm Sarah the Gallifreyan Ravenclaw. So to start off with, I'm sure you've read the title, so massive spoiler warning for both series of UK Traitors that have aired. I'm not going to spoil series 3, it's not even been filmed yet, but I am aware that there are some international versions. There's some on iPlayer, but I haven't got around to watching them yet. So if you're only planning on watching international versions, I'll try and explain who some of the people I'm referring to are. But if you are ever planning on watching the UK versions, go away now, watch them, come back when you have, because I'm going to mention who won and everything. So, hopefully you've turned off now if you haven't seen them, and I'll get started. So, I've titled the video, How to Win Traitors. So, this is going to be a breakdown of sort of all the mistakes that Traitors and Faithfuls made throughout both series, and plans that did work, and almost figure out the best ways to play it. So if you are watching this and you are actually applying for Series 3 or even being selected for Series 3, so this is sort of a reminder of the key points of the first two series and the best ways to do it, from my opinion, certainly. So if you are actually ever going to compete in the show, this would be a useful video. Otherwise, this is just a bit of fun of sort of the best ways to play it. So obviously some would depend on sort of the kind of person you are, but there are different things you should do. Whether or not you are a traitor or a faithful, there are different things you should be doing, because as a faithful you need to work out kind of what the traitors are thinking to try and catch them. So I'll start off with the biggest mistake the traitors made in Series 1. Technically, Wilf made. He stopped trusting Amanda. So, for anyone who hasn't seen it or needs a reminder, Wilf and Amanda were two of the original traitors, and at this point it was right near the end, the other one was already out, and he then stopped trusting this one. Because he had in the back of his mind how to betray her, so assumed she did too. She had no intentions of betraying him, she was hoping they'd both make it to the final. But he then started betraying her. So he threw her under the bus because he thought she was about to. But then, because the murders continued, he couldn't then win, because the Faithfuls knew there was a traitor, because someone had still been murdered since they'd got Amanda out. So he recruited Kieran, which was an even bigger mistake. Now, his sole reason for going for Kieran was they'd now got out two female traitors. He knew the Faithfuls were thinking there must be a man. It must be at least one of each gender. So he went for pretty much the only man left. It was only Kieran and Aaron left at that point. And he knew Aaron wouldn't be able to handle it. Too excitable. But Kieran was given the choice, not fairly like the previous recruitment, where they were just given an anonymous letter and told, give us your answer. He had to meet with Wilf, be offered it face to face, and by that point he obviously then knew Wilf was a traitor, so he was not going to be allowed to return as a faithful. So he was given the choice, become a traitor or die. So he only accepted it to save his own skin. He had no interest in being a traitor. He would never have accepted it if it had just been the anonymous letter. So he, in his head, was still Team Faithful, which isn't a good move for a traitor, to still be Team Faithful, because then they're going to backstab the other traitors, because they're then a faithful who know who the traitors are. So he broke the traitor's oath. He outed Wilf. He'd never explicitly said yes, he's a traitor, but voting for someone as you're getting banished, saying present for you, is kind of giving it away. So if Wilf and Amanda had made it to that final together, if it had been her instead of Kieran, whether Kieran was there as a faithful or not doesn't really matter. Someone else would have been murdered that night. Whether or not Kieran was there as a faithful doesn't really matter. Let's assume it was just Wilf, Amanda and the faithfuls who did make it to the final. Then they all sat down together. As soon as the faithful had got out one of them, the other one would have won. They may have even managed to get out enough faithfuls that actually then they could just end the game because there was so few people, and then they'd just steal it themselves and actually split it. But I honestly believe if they had both sat down at the final together, then the traitors would have won. One of them would have walked away with the money. Probably Amanda, because people were less suspicious of her. But then Wilf was also the running joke because of Maddie, but we'll get on to that. So I suppose the lesson from that is, as a traitor, what Amanda said afterwards was if they'd just spoken, she would have reassured him, no, I'm not planning on backstabbing you, and then they would have made it to the final. So I'd say be open about to the other traitors on what your plans are. So it's that weird medium of whether or not to trust your fellow traitors. But Kieran should not have done that. He literally broke the rules of the show. But if Wilf had just trusted that Amanda wasn't planning on backstabbing him, then they would have made it to the final together. So you need to know who to trust among the other traitors if you are a traitor. But traitors being loyal to each other throughout both series has been a bit hit and miss. Most obviously in series 2. Paul backstabbed every other traitor possible, and in the end that was his downfall. So I'd say almost never trust the other traitors do have your back, but don't be paranoid if they haven't given you reason to. If you know they're going around spreading your name, fine. But if you actually have no evidence they have even suggested you at any point, then just talk to them and say, are you planning on backstabbing me, or are you actually trying to get us both there? Like, Wilf threw Alyssa under the bus to protect himself. He knew his name was going to come up at that round table, so he spent the entire day planting Alyssa's and then brought it up at the table and managed to get her voted out over him by one vote, which was Amanda, which made it even madder. And I've already said about Wilf throwing Amanda because he believed she was about to throw him out under the bus. Kieran did throw Wilf under the bus, as he still considered himself a faithful. In Series 2, Ash was the only one, out of the original 4 certainly, who was actually thinking Team Traitors. Miles wasn't going to actively backstab any of the others, certainly in the early stages, but Ash was the only one sort of going, we're all in this together, which Paul and Harry clearly weren't by the fact they voted for her 2 nights in a row. That bitch in Traitor's Tower, despite her being shorter than all of the boys, they were all hiding, including Miles, who hadn't even voted for her. Miles pretty much just signed his own banishment. That was entirely his fault, because he suggested, oh, I'll do the cup and everything. But I'm surprised he didn't bring the others down with him, because the amount of sneaking around suspiciously looking for the cup the 3 of them did. I honestly believe that was at least an hour. They spent an hour looking for it. So the fact that once Miles was out, they didn't go, oh, well, you, Harry and Paul were all sneaking around really suspiciously. The fact that no one clocked that at that point. Harry claimed he wasn't planning on betraying Paul until Charlotte told him, incorrectly, that Paul was going around spreading his name. But I knew he was going to that episode before it even aired. Literally, I had a conversation with someone just before it aired, and they were like, oh, what do you think about Paul and Harry? And I'm like, Harry's going to betray Paul tonight. Paul's going to be banished tonight. Harry's going to betray him. And they were like, really? And I was proven right. So I don't think Paul realised how much Harry was creeping up behind him at that point. Paul was cracking and Harry was not. So Harry was jumping ready to become the boss of the traitors, as Paul was at the time. Harry could see Paul was cracking and knew he was going to bring the whole team down with him if he continued at that rate. So he nipped it at the bud. Charlotte's story, despite being factually incorrect, gave him the fire to do it. And to be honest, if him and Paul had just had a private conversation about Charlotte's conversation, he probably would have realised that Charlotte was actually mistaken in how that conversation went. but I still think he would have betrayed him. I think he was planning it more than he said he was, but it was quite obvious he was ready to pounce. Andrew joined the traitors not trusting Harry from the off. He was more suspicious of Paul, because Paul literally went, "Oh, you can trust us," and Miles was like, "Well, now I know you're a traitor, you got the last two out, like, why would I trust you?" But I think he did slowly trust Harry slightly more. I wouldn't say he ever fully trusted Harry as a fellow traitor, but in the final, he knew Harry could win it, and I think one of them said in the interview afterwards that Andrew didn't really care about winning, he just wanted to get to the final to prove something to himself. So once he'd got to the final, he was quite happy to go, "Yeah, Harry, you win it," and help him out. Because he knew once a traitor was banished that Harry was probably going to be alright. He knew in that final table they just needed to get a traitor out and the other one was fine. So he was quite willing to be the one, because he knew Harry could win it and he knew there was a lot of suspicion on him. Even though he had gone round a bit saying Harry over the previous few days, he never actually went for him at the table, unlike basically everyone else on this list. But then you also have to be careful as a traitor if you are throwing your other traitors under the bus. Not just from them if you don't succeed and they make it to the tower, as Paul and Harry learnt as they crumbled in front of Ash. But the most obvious bit from this was actually from the after show podcast from Series 2. What they did was they got every single contestant after leaving to go into a separate room and open an envelope and discover who the traitors were before they actually went home. And in the final, they got Evie to do this in the car as she left because they were banishing people constantly that day. So she had to do it in the car on the way out. And she opened that envelope and literally went, "Oh, well, Harry was really good at getting all the traitors. That makes sense now." And it's like, yeah. So if you are a traitor trying to get all the other traitors banished, the things to keep in mind are you don't want it to look like you're really good at catching traitors, because then people will be A, how have you not been murdered yet? And B, how do you always get it right? So you need to sort of plant the seeds and then let someone else do the attack and just sort of piggyback on it, not be the one leading the charge. And you also need to keep in mind that at that final table, you need more than one traitor. If you only have one traitor at that final table, they are just going to keep saying there's still a traitor among us until they've banished someone. If you have had a single murder since the last traitor banishment, you have to have more than one traitor at that final table. Whether it's the first time or when you're doing the bags, you need more than one traitor on that day. If one traitor gets banished at the round table that day and then you do the bags, you're fine, because there hasn't been a murder since. But if you have had any murder since the last banishment of a traitor, you need to have multiple, because no faithful is going to say, "Yes, we're all faithfuls," when there was someone murdered since you banished a traitor. There has to be another traitor. So if you want to win, you have to have two, and you have to have one who you kill off and they don't do a Kieran. You have to have one who you can banish without them going, "Well, the other one's them." So I mentioned it slightly at the beginning, but what about the sort of personality to go for? Because I broke down the traitors from the two series into a number of different types. Specifically ones who were traitors from the beginning. I'm not really focusing on recruitments. I am only focusing on the original traitors rather than the recruitment ones specifically, because they obviously had to do it for longer in most cases. So some of these methods have worked better than others. So there's the Harry and Wilf, the Alyssa and Ash, or what about Amanda or Paul? They're kind of similar but different. So Harry and Wilf were actually extremely similar if you look at just sort of their personalities and sort of the ways they were in the castle, specifically when they were pretending to be faithful. They were both very happy-go-lucky, they were both very popular, and their relationships between Hannah and Molly were very similar. Whereas traitors like Alyssa and Ash really struggled to sort of be that different person, which is most obvious by the fact that Alyssa, when she was being banished, literally went, "I'm a traitor," crying her eyes out. She was apologising for being a traitor as she was being banished. So that showed she wasn't coping with the stress of it. And that isn't as obvious with Ash because she was in a lot less time. But those last 2 days when everyone was looking at her, she was just panicking and crumbling, as opposed to some of the others who just sort of dealt with, oh, well, people are talking about me, but they're talking about everyone. Paul and Amanda had a similar method of disassociation, which is what Harry and Wilf struggled with. At the end of the day, as a traitor, you are going to be betraying your friends. Whether they're traitors or faithfuls, you are going to be betraying them. Because you're going to have to throw other traitors under the bus, and you're going to have to possibly murder your friends who are faithfuls. If you look at both Harry and Wilf in the final, you can see how much they're hurting. The fact Wilf runs away screaming, "I'm free!" and Harry, after going, "I'm the best traitor in the world," goes, "I hope Molly didn't hear that." So you can see how much it hurt them to betray their friends. Like Harry's face as Molly walks off after he's gone, "I'm a traitor." He just went, "Oh, I feel really sorry for her," despite the fact he should be celebrating he's just won 95,000. So especially when they were betraying Hannah and Molly. Wilf was in that final going, "I'm about to take this money away from Hannah, Aaron and Meryl," all three of which he was quite close with. And then Harry at the end, when he said, "I'm a traitor" to Molly, just the look on his face as he saw her storming off, he just felt really bad. You can see that. But Amanda and Paul's methods otherwise were actually quite different. Paul did something quite interesting, which he was the first person in the UK version certainly to do. He basically did method acting. Like he said in the after show he was literally reading like murder novels in the evenings to keep that frame of mind of like serial killer. So he just put on this character, but that started to be a problem because he just couldn't keep it up and started to crack, and that's when Harry, actually being authentic, was able to jump in, because he put on this performance and this character, but he struggled to keep it up. Keeping that performance up the whole time really took its toll on him. He also got too cocky, and he believed he was so popular that he had no suspicion on him and he'd never get banished because no one would even consider him because he was Mr. Popular. And that led to some stupid mistakes, many of which got him banished, and one of which could have changed the entire course of the show. I will get back to that later. Whereas Amanda was just very motherly, which I don't believe at any point was a tactic on her part. She's just a mum herself, so just lots of the others were significantly younger than her, so she just sort of became a motherly figure to them. There were a couple of motherly figures early on. Quite a few of them got murdered quite early on, so that sort of left her as the last motherly figure, which meant suspicion never really fell on her for quite a while, because everyone was like, no, she's my mum, like, she can't be a traitor, she couldn't go around murdering people, she's being so lovely to us. Though that did start to also put pressure on her, because she started to go, oh, well, I can't murder my babies. So which of these is the best method? I would say Harry and Wilf, by statistics, they're the two who made it to the final in both series. But I think if I was in Series 3, I would be extremely suspicious of someone who reminded me of Harry or Wilf, because I'd go, well, clearly you're good at being a traitor. But then the Series 2 traitors didn't learn from the Series 1 lot, as in Series 1 they decided to not put any of themselves on trial because they said, oh, well, people will assume traitors are on trial. And in Series 2 they put half of themselves in the dungeon condemned, which really could have gone badly because you can't murder a traitor. And at one point they were going to have to. Traitors were going to be the only options up for murder. So I'd say the best method depends on you. Depends on the sort of person you normally are. If when you're out with your friends you're the quiet one who hides in the corner, then being like Harry or Wilf isn't going to work. If you are like Harry or Wilf in real life, then that's fine, because that's what you're like. So especially if you're hoping to be a traitor, the best trick is be as honest as possible. Harry said in one of the interviews afterwards well, I only told Molly one lie, everything else I told her was true. So he didn't have to worry about lying about anything else, which was something that some of the faithfuls pointed out after Ross had been banished, that he'd said, I'm a traitor and Diane was my mum, they sort of went, well, how do you keep two secrets like that? Not realising he'd only been a traitor 5 minutes. But you also need to be able to compartmentalise. You need to be okay with, as Wilf called it, befriending and betraying. You can always slightly protect your friends, like the fact that Wilf got to the final with 3 people he was quite close with wasn't a coincidence. Unless they'd had a really, really good reason to murder Hannah, Wilf would have fought them on it. He would have gone, no, we can't murder her. She protects me. But you also have to be careful doing that to the point, because if you have 3 close friends and everyone else is being murdered and they go, hang on a minute, why are none of those 3 being murdered? If you have your little group of the 4 of you, say, and everyone else is being murdered, so at some point someone's going to go, how come no one from that friendship group's being murdered? And realise there's a traitor in that group, which then narrows it down to one of the 4 of you. And then your friends are either going to get banished or you are. So at some point you have to kill someone who they'd go, oh, well, you'd never have murdered them. You're so close to them. So you have to be ready to be able to do that. But what about some of the plans the traitors had that were slightly more successful? The best example is obviously Series 2 with Harry's shield. In the second series they did the shield slightly differently to the first series, probably to stop Tom's plan. So they could be taken by anyone and you didn't have to omit it. And in the early episodes, it was actually mostly the traitors who sort of instigated the, oh, we should tell. Like, I think Harry got a shield in the first ever challenge, and he was the first one to stand up going, yes, I've got a shield, which made the other 2 feel compelled to do it. And Paul, with the birdwatching one, they knew roughly who it was. One team had gone to look for it and it had already been taken. So they knew one of the other 2 teams had it. So between Harry and Paul, they would have figured it out anyway because they were on 2 of the teams. Because Harry and Paul were on 2 separate teams, the traitors knew who had the shield. They were going to know which of the teams had the shield at some point anyway. When Harry and Paul spoke in Traitors' Tower that evening, it would be either Paul goes, I've got it, Harry goes, I've got it, or they both go, okay, so it was the 3rd team. It didn't matter which team had it, they were going to know. So Paul, being on the team who got it, just sort of went, oh, we should tell. And he said it loudly enough that the team next to them heard them anyway. So they then had to say it. But later on, people did start keeping it more secret. So when Harry saw it in that tunnel, he went, oh. And he had already kind of planted the seeds of that, because quite a few people had been very surprised he'd made it to breakfast that morning. They'd all gone, well, you're really good at getting traitors out. You've just got a traitor out. Why wouldn't they have killed you? So he went, well, I can get a shield and that will at least divert those questions. And then Molly saw him, but she was never going to say anything. We already know how close they are. And then he spent that evening telling specific people, with the idea to recruit that night, which meant the next day anyone who hadn't known he had a shield was under suspicion, because they go, well, there wasn't a murder, so therefore they must have tried to kill Harry, which worked ridiculously well. There were a lot of things that could have gone wrong in that plan, including the recruited traitor was the first person to say, well, they could have recruited, which was not a smart move on his part, but they didn't actually believe him. But because Harry did make some other mistakes with that plan. First, he only told Andrew in the tower. I would have told Andrew in front of someone else. Like, he told Jazz and Zach simultaneously, so that they both could verify each other knew. But Andrew he only told in the tower, so Andrew just at breakfast quickly went, oh, I knew. But he should have probably made a point of telling him the night before. Even if it was then, he said it again to Andrew in front of Jazz or Zach. And it wasn't telling anyone else. Just with someone who he already told, he'd tell Andrew again. So someone else could verify Andrew knew. And I said Harry had kind of made it necessary to do it, because some people have been surprised he'd made it to breakfast. And then he was literally going around going, yeah, I'm surprised I'm still here. Well, I don't know why I wasn't murdered last night. So making it look like they then did try to the next night was a smart plan in that case, because they'd sort of go, oh, well, maybe they couldn't decide between the two people, and they've now decided they've done one, they're doing the other. So how long could he have really kept going around saying, oh, I thought they were going to murder me last night, until people started getting suspicious of, yes, why haven't you been murdered? The traitors are really stupid to be keeping you alive. The other thing was the recruitment itself. They wanted someone to be a scapegoat, but I feel it worked too quickly. They should have tried to keep them for a day or two, and then, like I said earlier, you need to banish a traitor after the final murder, so that then all the other traitors are protected. So personally, I wouldn't have chosen someone who didn't know. I would have recruited Jazz or Zach, who I said someone else can verify they knew. So therefore, they're not under suspicion instantly. But Jazz and Zach were both under suspicion anyway. But in general, the plan did work. It got the new recruit banished before he'd even ever committed a single murder. And he didn't stand up and say, I'm a newly recruited traitor, which I don't think is against the rules, because it would only be admitting there's more, which you're going to know when there's been a murder that night anyway. And getting a traitor out at that point meant that everyone was like, no, there's only one more. But the problem was Ross knew he was being brought in as a scapegoat. He was trying to get the others caught, particularly Harry, once he knew who'd been a traitor when Diane's murder had happened. He knew that Andrew wasn't a traitor yet, so he didn't really go for him. He was going for Harry because he wanted revenge for Diane's murder. And he knew that morning that he was going to get banished. He knew he was going to be banished. He probably suspected it before he'd even accepted becoming a traitor, that he was probably going to get banished the next day. But he went, well, if I don't get banished, they'll murder me if I say no. But this was something I did wonder if Harry got the idea from Series 1. Because the night they attempted to recruit Alex, Amanda had the shield. So until Alex went, they tried to recruit me last night, then everyone was assuming it was they'd attempted to kill Amanda, which even after Alex said that, kept the suspicion off Amanda. Because everyone hadn't gone, oh, well, they wouldn't have tried to kill you. They sort of believed she was someone that would be a target, which again causes the problem of sort of why is she still there the next night. But when they knew it wasn't the shield, that fixed that. But this time they didn't. So it's almost a question of, why did no one question why Harry was still there the day after? Surely the traitors, if you try to kill someone but they have a shield, you just try again the next night. They're not going to have a shield twice in a row. So if you did attempt to plan like the shield plan, you also have to factor in that people will be like, well, if you were protected by the shield last night, why are you not dead again the next night? One other quick sort of side note with this. In Series 2, no one said no to becoming a traitor. Ross said yes partly just to see who'd murdered his mum. Andrew said yes because he convinced himself that they'd murder him otherwise. Which, seen as the plan to kill him originally had been the night that they put people in the dungeon. If that night had been a murder night rather than a condemn people to the dungeon night, he would have been murdered then. So he probably would have still been murdered a couple of days later, but not particularly because he refused. But in Series 1, Alex said no, and Kieran, I've already said, only said yes because that was literally his option. It was murder or recruitment. But Alex was murdered the next day, and Amanda even wrote on it, "You should have joined us." Which I think set the precedent, at least in faithfuls' heads, that happened in Series 1, so if you say no to the traitors, you will be murdered. Even though I don't think the traitors would have actually killed Ross, or probably Andrew, the next night just for saying no. They chose Ross because they knew he was about to get banished. So he was going to get banished no matter what. And Andrew probably would have been murdered just a couple of nights later, but I don't believe they would have gone, oh, well, let's murder him tomorrow because he said no. They'd have just murdered someone else because that fits the plan better. So I said before about the traitors and their best friends, I mean, mostly Hannah and Molly. So if you're a traitor and you know there is someone who will never vote for you, and they're 100% sure you're faithful, the one thing you should never do is do something that makes them think you don't trust them. In Series 1, Wilf did it at the dining table. he didn't go for Hannah as his 100%. He said it was because he wanted people to suspect her later on, which I've always thought was a stupid move, because he was protecting her from being murdered because he liked her, so why would he be trying to set her up for banishment? But also, he kept saying that, apart from when he was in Traitor's Tower, he was going, I'm a faithful, and I'm going to be faithful Wilf. So, everyone was surprised he didn't go for Hannah. So that looked like a weird move. So it was like, why would Wilf not go for Hannah? Everyone knows that they're best friends and they're each other's 100%, right? And it was Amanda's choice that night that was the seed for her banishment, with a bit of help from Wilf. But if Wilf had gone Hannah as 100%, would she have still voted for him in the final? Or what about if in Series 2, Harry had put that red bag at the end when only Jazz did? And that would have shown Molly that he was doing something different to what they'd agreed earlier. He had said to her earlier, if it's just you, me and Jazz, I'm happy to end the game. And she'd have gone, are you sure about Jazz? So if he'd then gone, oh, well, I'm putting the red bag, I want to vote again, she'd have gone, why? You said you trusted me and Jazz. Why do you now no longer trust us when you did an hour ago? Could you imagine if Harry had voted for Molly at any point in the final? I think we know where that would have gone. I think he wouldn't have won. So, if you're a traitor and have a loyal friend who trusts you 100%, deflects when people are talking about you, tells you if people are talking about you, the one thing to not do is betray them. Bar taking the money at the end if you manage to get to the final with just them. But I said earlier about Paul's biggest mistake, which didn't really affect him, but could have affected the entire game and ruined things for the traitors. He told Jazz it was Harry who told him he was still going around saying Paul's a traitor. Jazz said he told 3 people that, which included Ross, so he should have been suspicious once they banished Ross and Ross had said he was a traitor. But he did that to see if it got back to Paul. So if Paul had just said sort of, I thought we were fine, why am I hearing you're still going round telling me that? It could be like he'd overheard a conversation, rather than he'd actually been told it by any of the 3. He probably didn't realise it'd been said to multiple people, so he was instantly outing Harry as someone who goes running to Paul. So from that minute, Jazz was convinced that Harry was a traitor, because he was already convinced Paul was, and as soon as Paul was banished, then he knew Harry was a traitor. But Paul was so confident that the pair of them would make it to the final together, and neither of them would ever be banished, that he didn't even consider that a problem. But what about being a newly recruited traitor, and what you do on that first day? Andrew took a while to grow into it. If you look at that bit of his first day as a traitor when he's mingling at the breakfast table and he's just sort of standing there going like this, then you go, oh, he's going to get caught in about 3 seconds. But he did get very good at it, because the biggest obstacle being a recruited traitor means you spend a lot of the game as a faithful and then suddenly you're a traitor. Miles only spent 1 day, so I'm not really counting him on this. I'm counting the others. So you have to suddenly change your mindset, but still look like you're being the same person. Because if it's only the 1 day, like the day on the train for most of them, and then 1 more day for Miles, people don't really know you. You might only have a few people who you've even really spoken to about more than, hello, my name is. Once you've had a bit of time there and people feel like they know you, then being a different person suddenly looks like you've been recruited. Whether or not you have, or whether you're just tired, is a different matter. But like, lots of people got banished for you've been acting different. Certainly in Series 1. Lots of people went, you've started acting different. You have to try and continue consistently behaving like you were before, despite now being a traitor. Which, in that sense, is best to use Wilf's mindset of, when you are in the castle, bar when you are in Traitor's Tower, you are a faithful, you are not a traitor. Just convince yourself the lie and then you can't mess it up. Like, Wilf even kept not even being honest in front of the camera. At one point in Series 1, he was in the sofa room talking to the camera and he just sort of went, because I'm a traitor, and then went, oh, I feel so bad even saying I'm a traitor. So I've done a lot of things that the traitors do wrong. What about a mistake that faithfuls made? Now, this was mostly in Series 1, but there were still traces of it in Series 2. If you have two people who it's torn between at the round table and the vote gets quite tight, and then one of them stands up and goes, I'm a traitor. Why does that mean the other one's faithful? That is how Wilf survived after Alyssa's banishment. Because everyone just sort of went, oh, I'm so sorry for even considering it was you. Bar Maddie, but Maddie was Maddie. And instantly believed he was a faithful and went, oh, you've just proven you're a faithful by getting Alyssa out. We've already said traitors don't remain loyal to each other much. Being a traitor catcher probably means you're a traitor. So in Series 2, there was a bit of that, because when Paul was going versus Miles, I don't know how many people would have still gone for Paul the next day if Harry hadn't then gone around going, that's clearly two traitors versus each other. Because he said it to, I think it was Zach, at the table. He literally, in the middle of their argument, went, do you think this is two traitors having a go at each other? Which was a great move on Harry's part, because it meant he was getting rid of both of them in one fell swoop. And then he just spent the next day going around saying Paul was a traitor. So don't assume because they're the person who pointed the finger and it's between two that the other one's faithful. But then you also have the opposite with Evie, where she was going, well, me and Ross, neither of us are traitors. And then as soon as Ross stood up and said traitor, she went, I'm out, aren't I? But to be fair, I think at that point she was out the next day, even if Ross had stood up and said faithful. Because if Ross had stood up and said faithful, they would have gone, well, a traitor still didn't know, therefore it must be you still. So I don't think Evie was going to be safe the next day, no matter what Ross said. I don't think Ross's recruitment actually made a difference to Evie's fate. So I said, almost, if as a faithful, be careful of the people who keep getting it right and spotting the traitors. If someone has twice gone, I think you're a traitor, at the round table and being correct, they are probably a traitor, or they're really good at playing the game. But then what about how to express suspicions? Now I'm going to do this as Jazz versus Maddie, because they had very different methods on doing this. Jazz kept quiet for a very long time about his suspicions of first Paul and then Harry. Which probably falls into what I just said about be suspicious if someone's too good at spotting traitors. Because he got Paul, he spent ages saying Paul quietly and waiting for other people to agree so he could jump on the bandwagon. And that's why when Paul got banished, he literally went to Harry with, you did that! Because he knew by that point Harry was a traitor as well. So that's why he went up to Harry going, oh, that was all you, because he knew at that point that Harry was a traitor. And he didn't want people to think that he was good at spotting traitors. He wanted people to think Harry was. So then he kept quiet about Harry for an extremely long time. He kept going, oh, I'll save it for later, I'll save it for later. Later came and he still never really said anything. The only time he ever really went for Harry was that final, when he voted Harry. But at that point he was only trying to convince Molly, who, that was a lost cause. She was never going to vote him. So I think he stayed quiet too long. But then there's the reverse, Maddie, who spent so long insisting Wilf was a traitor, it became a running joke. Every word she said was a joke. No one took her seriously. Kieran and Amos did on their first day, and then they joined in with everyone else going, yeah, she just says it all the time, doesn't she? So that much insistence and refusal to look at anyone else, because she then was shocked when both Alyssa and Amanda were banished because they weren't Aaron, Wilf or Meryl. And they were the traitors as far as she was concerned. So there's got to be a fine line in between them. You can keep your suspicions quiet and only say it to a few people you trust for a bit, but at some point you're going to have to say it publicly. But then you also don't want to just every day go for the same person, because no one is going to listen to you after a while. You've got to be willing to look at the other ones and go with the crowd every so often. Because I think she just voted Wilf or Aaron about 6 days in a row, which meant she wasn't voting the actual traitors out. She didn't agree with a single banishment for ages because she just kept going Wilf or Aaron. So what you've got to do if you are convinced of a traitor is just sort of go and say it to a few people you trust and make it known that you believe that person's a traitor, which then protects you from murder if you are correct. If a few days later you are still there, that possibly means you were correct. Therefore, you then start saying it at the table. But if everyone goes, no, we're also convinced that so-and-so's a traitor, we're all voting them today. Don't sit there and still write the name of the person you said. Go with them. If they're wrong, then the next day go, okay, you were wrong, now will you listen to me? And try it like that. Don't be as insistent as Maddie, because Maddie just made it a running joke that she was so convinced it was them that she wasn't even going to look at anyone else, and then they were literally voting out actual traitors. So she was right with Wilf, but her logic was bonkers, so no one was listening to her. So thank you for listening to this very long ramble about the Traitors, both series, and the different ways to play the game. If you are ever on it, good luck. I hope this helped. Otherwise, this is just a bit of fun of sort of the tactics that worked best so far. And who knows, maybe I'll make another one of these after a few more series, or even after I've seen some of the international versions and see if any of them have done things I said, or if some of the things I said they've tried and they haven't worked. And maybe some other mistakes they've made. And if you are ever doing the Traitors, if you ever actually get the opportunity to be on the show, I hope this helps. But otherwise, I'll see you next week. Bye.